Transmogrify. Lucy, I'm recording this for you so that you have some clarity about things you don't quite remember. I've wanted to tell you about this when you got older and in person, but with the way things are going with Mom and I right now, it's a very bad time to bring this up and talk to you about it. It would not help my case. It would not help our case. It would not help us stay together or close. Also, right now, you're not old enough. You're just now starting to get over it. All of it. I can't imagine a time in the near future where it's ever going to be appropriate to hear this from me in person, so I really hope that someday you do hear this, and you end up believing it. End up believing in me. Believing in what really happened, so that we can discuss it. God, I wish I could. I wish this would help now, because it really is what happened. And the parts you remember, it's not the whole story. And it's not how Dr. Palmer said it happened either. It was only a couple months ago when we took that road trip, just you and me, up the Appalachians to see Grandma Vicky Gordon, Grandma Gordon, my mother. Remember, we planned it for a couple weekends in a row, and you were so excited, especially because I said you were going to be big enough to sit in the front seat all the way there. And you were really excited to see all the wildlife and the trails and the trees and the bugs and the fish and the ponds and to catch frogs. Anyway, Mom gave us a hard time about it when we were about to leave that morning, when I got a call from Grandma, which also didn't go real well. You were already crying because Mom changed her mind about letting you go, and then she finally changed it back, and we were already running so late. You pouted about the whole thing until we stopped at that gas station and I got you that Snickers bar. Then you stared out the window for miles of interstate, and then it got dark. And you fell asleep with your head pressed against Bun Bun, leaning against the window. I left the interstate just as the sun was going down, but we were still an hour and a half from Grandma's. I swirled the last dribble of sickly sweet backwash of energy drink in my mouth and wish I had another can. Wish I had stopped at that last gas station we passed. Well, there weren't that many past a certain point, and I figure, it was probably still at least a half hour to 45 minutes before I could stop again. It had been a long time since we made this ride, and I forgot what a bore it was. It was almost hypnotic with the wind, the winding turns in the hills, but the air was alive with the loud chorus of frogs and bugs, backed by that warm road wind caressing my head through the window that I could finally open up, since you were finally asleep. You kept on telling me to shut it the entire time we were on the interstate. The trees blotted out much of the moon, and there was almost no street signs and really no street lights to speak of. There was only the faded yellow stripes and the occasional rusty guardrail. And I started asking myself when the last time I saw another car. When I felt myself get too transfixed on the road, I'd check my mirrors once, twice, 3 times, nothing but my taillights. The road could be disappearing behind me for all I knew. A few more minutes, a few more miles, 1 or 2 more glances. I wasn't sure when exactly, but I was startled to find the soft outline of what I assumed to be a large black semi-truck appear about a car length and a half behind us. The truck closed in, and I could make out its soft yellow headlights streaming through a protective grid. The whole truck was almost futuristic in design, with its cave-over design, with swept, narrowing, streamlined contours that I would expect something out of a Tesla. But the material itself looked rusted, beaten, lackluster, almost molted. As it closed and we took longer turns, I could make out the trailer. It was like a long flatbed with a wrinkly but shiny black and brown patterned tarp covering at least 6 objects, which gave it this camel-humped appearance. The tarp flapped a bit in the wind, and I could see whatever was underneath it had this same kind of soft yellow-green glow of the headlights. I was already going 10 over, but that truck was overtaking me. As it closed, I was mesmerized by the rhythmic reflections of the wheels, which were so perfect it seemed so unnatural in the sense that I'd never seen that kind of rhythm in a truck wheel before. Then I thought to myself, though, when was the last time I watched a truck's wheel in my side view because it was this close to me? Usually I would just pass and ditch them, too quick to notice. And in this case, my eyes darted to my gauges and I saw I was pushing 15 over, and I wasn't keeping up. Maybe this is how all the small carriers competed. Maybe they went ham on the back roads if they were behind. I looked over to you, and I realized that I should slow down and let this behemoth pass me instead of engaging in a duel of speed. I slid my foot off the gas pedal as I rounded another curve. Up ahead there was a declining slope, and I figured I could safely drop back and let him pass since there were no other vehicles on the road. Then that's when we got hit. The impact was surprisingly mild, and at first I wasn't sure what you even hit, but the bump forward and the crack of my plastic fender told me all I needed to know. I looked in the rear view and then saw my side and back to my rear view, and the culprit was now backing off by a few car lengths now. I slowed and came to a stop on the shoulder. The truck did so as well. I checked on you and you were still out like a light, and I hoped that you would just stay that way. I'll be honest, as I pulled my insurance card out and my cell phone, there was nothing more than I just simply wanted to exchange information with this driver and report it later. So long as their truck was drivable and the driver had no issue with it, I was just happy to give him the insurance info and report it some other time. Nevertheless, I was also really angry. I was really concerned that this truck driver and this truck could have hurt you, and I think that made me really aggressive at the time. I got out, I snapped a few photos of my fender, and to be honest, there wasn't much damage. Though yours was a minor black scuff that might have been there before, as well as a weird, punch mark on my hatchback. I held my phone ready in case the driver emerged from his cab in a belligerent state. I started walking fast to the sides of the truck with my hands up, flagging him out. I was eased slightly by the fact the driver apparently turned his engine off, since I couldn't hear the distinctive rumble of a diesel engine, nor see any exhaust plume from the curved pipes hoisted over the cab. I approached within 2 car lengths when I started yelling to the driver. I clearly and plainly announced my intentions to not make a federal case out of this, but I also called him an ass since I had you with me. And like I said, I was upset and worried about you. Not to mention, your mom would kill me, since, her fears of you being able to sit in the front seat would have been borne out by that collision, no matter how minor it was. Then the truck lurched forward. Only a couple feet at first, and that's when I started to get even more mad. I started to cuss the driver out as it lurched a few feet forward, and then a few more feet forward, and then the cab started to turn towards me while I was standing in the middle of the road. The soft glow of the caged lights did not prevent me from getting a decent view of the whole vehicle now, head on. It was the strangest material and design, unlike any other truck I'd ever seen. It was streamlined. It made me look like some sort of weird plastic, but also organic and rough. The seams where the windshield and doors should be looked like they were drawn on by some material, but by somebody less skilled in drawing than you were at the time. The truck had no mirrors, no grille, no any other lights, including turn signals. Just the 2 soft, caged, round, greenish-yellow headlights. As it made one last move towards me, I decided to take a few steps back, and then I noticed the exhaust pipes weren't emitting anything at all, but they were twitching, almost in a rhythmic pattern. And then I realized the truck was making no noise at all, but it was moving. I thought to myself, this must have been some sort of prototype. Maybe the whole accident was just me unfortunately being caught up in some sort of test run failure. Something whoever was driving, maybe not driving, didn't want to make this public. That must have been the case, as I thoroughly looked it over again, and I didn't find a license plate, but nor did I find a brand logo or any other identifying marks on the truck. I was also pretty sure that Even an electric vehicle made some noise. I mean, Uncle Clarence's Prius made a slight whine, especially when it was accelerating. I stared it down all the way back to the car, and I so very, very much regret not taking video of any of this. The next thing that happened was the row of lights started to glow. 6 more on top of the first 2, and then 4 more underneath each of the first 2. The warm glow of the yellow-green chilled first to blue, and then darkened to a deep, unsettling blood red, like some sort of infrared sensor or something. Something was very wrong, and that's when I decided to vote for our car. I sped away down the road as fast as I could. This alien, demonic-looking truck caught up to us very fast, casting us in its unearthly, reddish glow. There was a sharp turn ahead, and for what I could see, no other vehicles were in front or behind us. The robotic, mechanical-like truck rammed us once again. And I decided then I would not allow this to happen a third time. I've probably watched too many action movies, or maybe in this case not enough, but I decided to put us into a bootlegger's U-turn skid across the lane, where the turn was the sharpest and narrowest. It was very dangerous, as the road basically plummeted down a steep slope into the trees, and the road on the other side hugged a steep rock face. I overcompensated to make sure we didn't skid off the road or flip, so instead I skidded too far out and bashed the passenger side tail of the car into a rusted guardrail. This is when you started to wake up and started to cry because Bunmun fell to the floor from the impact and you couldn't find him. I couldn't help you because we were stuck, because the emergency brakes seized up and seemed to be twisted on that guardrail somehow. Either way, I struggled to free us. My eyes darted between the e-brake lever and the rear view as I was stunned to see the truck make an impossible stop and turn. Apparently the flatbed must have had some sort of new joint or something in the middle of it, because it was able to pivot on 3 points during its about face. I think the truck was toying with me, as it took a few seconds after its insane turn to slowly and methodically maneuver the cab directly at us, and its red lights directly at us before it started accelerating towards us again. We were beached like a whale and stuck like in a finger trap, and then I finally tried throwing it into reverse. Not only did this unlock the e-brake, fortunately, but it also released us from the guardrail. I punched the gas and saw the truck crush the remains of our broken fender as it rolled across the road. I sent us screaming way above 80 miles an hour with the truck still overtaking us. I was barely in control, and all it would take to end both of us was another car coming the other direction, a mistimed turn, or a well-timed final ramming to send us diving into the ravine below. I had one last idea up my sleeve. The driver, or the computer, or whatever was making the truck go probably couldn't react in time. As we roared up the slope, I abruptly moved into the opposite lane and stepped on the brakes. The truck flew past us as I struggled to keep the vehicle on the road, even with the anti-lock brakes. We stopped short of the peak, and I was able to turn back into our lane and put on the emergency flashers. I told you to wait in the car, but you got out with me anyway. This is the one time I'm glad you didn't listen to me. You ran around the front of the car with me and demanded uppie, so I picked you up and threw you over my shoulder as I walked up the hill, expecting to see the truck wrecked against the rock face. I definitely believed at that point this thing was a remote or self-driving vehicle, so I felt no guilt at all about tricking it into crashing itself. So help me, I thought to myself at the time, when I figured out what company had built this thing and sent this thing out on the roads, there would be hell in 7 figures to pay. Enough to send you to college. At least. But there was no sign of the truck. No wreckage, no red headlights, nothing. I peered down the winding road as far as I could. Even though it had many blind spots, at the speed it was going, I'd figured I'd catch at least a glimpse of it, but still, nothing. Then a dim red glow in the form of several round light beams appeared on the road's surface. My mind thought they looked like spotlights at a show, so my eyes naturally turned up to the rock face. I lost my breath as I saw the truck mounted vertically on the rock face, peering down at the road, and the cab seemed to be lifted by the trailer, like the head of a serpent, staring down at us. In the bright moon-struck rock face, I could clearly make out what had been chasing us. It wasn't a truck at all. First of all, it had no wheels. What I thought were the wheels were in fact stubby, fast legs with variation in color that apparently, when they moved fast enough in the night lights of the road, gave an illusion of a spinning wheel. The quote-unquote trailer section was just a differently sized and colored ridges on the back of this thing, with a thin bit of its skin draped over the edges to make it look like a poorly tied down oversized tarp. The vehicle was one monstrous creature with smooth, shiny, yet still organic skin, like a worm or a caterpillar. It stared at us, its tail grasping the rock face, like how any bug grips any vertical walls, bobbing its head cab at us, with its little legs dangling and pulsating towards us. And then it slowly set itself down on the road again, in such a controlled way it barely made a noise as it finally crawled off. I gripped you tighter, as tight as I have ever held you, as it charged us. At the last second, it snaked around us entirely. It made a beeline for my parked car. It plowed into it at full speed. Its two exhaust pipes turned into hands, and they folded down to grasp the car. And then the whole creature, with my car in its grasp, climbed up the rock face again and disappeared off the roads and over the hills. As the haze of shock started to dissipate, it was just you and me, stranded on the road in the moon shadow of the trees and clouds. You were crying, but I needed your help. My phone was in the car, and I was hoped by some miracle upon miracles in the midst of the creature's manhandling of it, I would find my phone intact amongst the debris field of shattered glass and plastic strewn across the road. After almost a half hour of searching, there was no luck, and I was still 60 miles at least from Grandma's and probably 30 to 40 miles away from any gas station. You were crying about the car and about being so dark, and I just kept on telling you it was just a little accident. It was just a little accident. Then you started crying about leaving Bun Bun in the car. So I picked you up and we started walking. And eventually you fell asleep on my shoulders as I walked until sunup. I was reluctant to try to flag down any vehicles for obvious reasons, and I never really saw another car driving along this way anyway. I finally took a break in a small turnoff which looked like an abandoned and closed-down tourist roadside attraction. It said Butterfly Observation Point, closed for the season. My legs were throbbing, and my feet felt like they were sacks of blood, bones, and flesh held together only by my shoes. I stared at the sign for a minute, thinking, great, that's part of the reason we're here. The damn bugs. Grandma promised you the Butterfly Festival, after all. You wandered off to play in the somewhat run-down plywood cutouts of the butterflies and flowers, and I warned you to watch out for nails and wasps between panted, tired breaths. I figured we weren't far from civilization now, maybe another couple miles at most. I'd have to get us there. If you remember, you looked out over some fence towards the end of this park and shouted and said you thought you saw our car in the woods. You had to tell me twice before I finally came over to see what you were looking at, and I was shocked to find out that you were right. Nestled among a thicket of trees and a creek, the badly damaged wreck of my car was indeed scattered amongst at least another dozen different vehicles. It took us close to a half hour to figure out how to climb down safely from where we were into that clearing. But finally, we found ourselves in the middle of a vehicular graveyard. The ground was wet, swampy, and coated in some kind of mud with a thin, deceptively solid layer on the top that gave way just to pure muck. I looked around in amazement because there were vehicles here from virtually every decade. There was even the rotted spokes of something that resembled a wagon wheel sticking out of the shallow creek. All of the newer vehicles were damaged in nearly identical ways. They were bulged out like something exploded inside of them, with the windshields, windows, and doors all compromised. The trunk or the hatchbacks were penetrated by something about a foot in diameter, while all their roofs, except for my roof, were punched through from the inside like Superman had decided to punch his way out of the top. I kicked an early 2000s model Autosmith Rustler, and the whole thing collapsed in the middle as if it had been entirely rusted through. The driver's side door swung open, and I poked my head inside to investigate. The entire interior, the seats, the console, the steering wheel, the other controls, everything was melted down like something had rolled up the windows and pumped it full of acid. It looked like one of those pictures they say, what stroke victims see at the end. Something really close to being familiar, but it all ran together into something completely unfamiliar and something that couldn't be described. There was also a thin layer of a brownish yellow material that looked a lot like old grate foam that came from the can. It was then I realized I wanted to check our car next to see if maybe, by some miracle, my phone was still in there. But I wasn't hopeful given the state of this vehicle's interior. As I was about to walk over to our car, though, I noticed something strange in the partly melted indoor trash compartment. It was very white and seemed unlike anything else in the car. I shouldered the door open and grabbed whatever it was out, only to immediately drop it to the ground. It was bones. It was a mostly intact part of a human hand and part of an arm. Whatever had been sprayed into the car had not only dissolved the interior, but also most of the driver and any other occupants that were unlucky to still be in there. That's when I looked over to our car, and noticed that it was full of something vaguely green. You yelled over to me from the passenger side of the car, screaming that you thought that you saw Bun Bun, and then you went for the door handle. I yelled to you to not go near the door, but I was too late. Whatever was in the vehicle was covered in that acid, and it splashed onto your clothes. I told you to do a fire drill, stop, drop, and roll with your arm away from the rest of your body. As I ran over, I could hear fizzing like the sound of a freshly opened can of soda being poured into a glass, and I saw a blotch on your jacket start to turn from blue to brown. I yanked it off of you as best as I could without splashing any onto me, but a small amount of it dripped onto your shirt, and then I tore that off as well. I watched in horror as tiny specks of that stuff started to turn bright red, and you started to cry in pain. You screamed that it hurt, and I had to stop you from wiping it with your other hand. Whatever it was eventually able to stop burning after I wiped it away with some pine needles that I found on the ground. The places where it splashed on your arm were beet red, blistering where the specks of the stuff had gotten through the jacket and through the shirt. So anyway, that's why you have those scars there now. I just held you and tried to calm you down as you cried and cried and cried. I was so scared, Lucy. I didn't know what to do. All I did was stare into my car, which was filled with this thin, undulating, pulsating blob of acid, which, after a time, I realized that inside that blob were thousands of tiny little black specks swimming around. And just random memory from grade school about having a tank full of caterpillars, which turned into cocoons and later butterflies. I was thinking this must be a cocoon. After seeing you cry yourself to sleep on me, I heard a faint buzzing sound on the driver's side of my car. By some miracle, my phone got popped out of it from the rolled down driver's side window, and it didn't get covered in the acid. The phone was buzzing because Grandma Vicky was calling, and apparently it called several times while we were walking in the dark. I ignored her and instead called for help. After I gave our location to the dispatch, I got transferred around a lot on 911. Finally, some weird officials from a state wildlife and park service came with medics. I was confronted with a stark choice of either getting answers and a trespassing charge, or being treated with no report and released, free to go. With you hurt but stable, my car destroyed, and Grandma on the way to pick us up, I decided to choose the latter. But I was part of a cover-up, probably to preserve some dangerous species of butterfly which had some strange life cycle that apparently involved monstrous caterpillar mimicry of vehicles to capture and turn them into their own cocoons. Occupants be damned. It seemed far-fetched until you realize that hundreds of people go missing every year, and what's one carload every 10 or so in the grand scheme of things. The bottom line is, no one who believed me was going to help me, and no one who could help me was going to believe me. If you ask me, Mom was looking for an excuse for this for some time, but you came back days late with a chemical burn, having been in a car accident with me, and I was unable to tell her or her lawyer or my lawyer or the judge what really happened. And that meant she got full custody. I'm still fighting it, but even as I'm making this recording for you, you're less than a week away from moving to the West Coast, and I'm still fighting accusations of child endangerment. Specifically, they thought you got the burns from a meth lab that Grandma and I were running, or something like that. While my lawyer and your mom's lawyer are confused about the test results on the nature of your burns, even when I'm cleared from that bullshit, it's still not looking good for us, sweetie. I know they put a lot of words in your mouth and that you weren't awake for a lot of it, or saw a lot of it. So, and you're traumatized. And I know you blame me for Bun Bun, but I don't blame you. And don't blame yourself. Not now, not someday. But someday you'll hear this, and hopefully it'll clear up for you what happened that night. Oh, I guess I should probably tell you what Grandma said when she called us, when Mom and I were fighting about letting you go with me that morning. She tried to back out of letting us come down to visit, and I was yelling to your mom and yelling at Grandma and trying to comfort you, but it didn't click when she told me why I shouldn't show up. Why we shouldn't come down. She told me not to come down because it was bug season. Anyway, I love you, Lucy.